I used to believe that jealousy was something you could control, that if you just smiled long enough, pretended hard enough, pushed those dark feelings deep enough inside yourself, they would eventually disappear. I was wrong. I was so terribly, devastatingly wrong. And now I sit here in an empty apartment surrounded by boxes I never finished unpacking, staring at a phone that hasn't rung in 7 months, wondering how I let myself become the villain in a story I never saw coming. My name is Claire Mitchell. I am 34 years old, and I destroyed my sister's life because I couldn't accept that she had what I always wanted. This is my confession, not because I expect forgiveness, not because I think anyone will understand, but because the weight of what I did is crushing me. And if I don't say it out loud, if I don't let these words exist somewhere outside of my own tortured mind, I'm afraid I'll lose whatever is left of my sanity. Emma was born when I was 3 years old. I don't remember a time before her, but I remember the exact moment everything changed, or at least that's how it felt growing up. Before Emma, I was the center of my parents' universe. After Emma, I became invisible. That's not fair, of course. My parents loved me, they still love me, even now, even after everything. But there was something about Emma that captured people in a way I never could. She had this light about her, this effortless warmth that made strangers smile and friends feel like family. She walked into rooms and people noticed. She laughed and everyone wanted to laugh with her. And me? I tried. God, I tried so hard my whole life. I got straight A's in school while Emma doodled in her notebooks. I went to law school while Emma dropped out of college to pursue art. I married a successful man, bought a beautiful house, climbed the corporate ladder at my firm until I was managing an entire department. And yet, somehow, at every family dinner, at every holiday gathering, at every milestone celebration, the spotlight always found its way to Emma. Emma and her incredible talent. Emma and her gallery exhibitions. Emma and her adorable boyfriend who was obviously going to propose any day now. Emma, 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 always Emma. I told myself I was proud of her. I told everyone I was proud of her. And part of me was, truly, she was my baby sister. I had taught her how to ride a bike. I had held her hand on her first day of kindergarten. I had stayed up all night with her when she was 16 and some boy had broken her heart, feeding her ice cream and promising that she was too good for him anyway. I loved her. I really did. But love and jealousy, I learned, can exist in the same heart. They can twist around each other like vines, choking out the good until all that's left is something dark and poisonous. And I let that poison grow. I watered it with every comparison I made between us. I fed it with every moment I felt overlooked. I nurtured it until it became something monstrous, something that would eventually consume everything I held dear. The real trouble started 3 years ago when Emma announced her engagement to James Cooper. James was everything David wasn't, though I couldn't admit that to myself at the time. Where David was polished and ambitious, always calculating his next move, James was genuine and grounded. He looked at Emma like she was the only person in the room. He remembered small things, like how she took her coffee or which flowers made her smile. He built his entire life around making her happy, and you could see it in every interaction, every gentle touch, every private smile they shared. When Emma showed us her engagement ring at Sunday dinner, my mother cried tears of joy. My father pulled James aside and shook his hand with both of his, something he had never done with David. And I sat there with a champagne glass in my hand, my cheeks hurting from my frozen smile, while something inside me cracked wide open. David noticed. He always noticed things like that. It was one of the things I had loved about him when we first met, how observant he was, how he seemed to understand things before you even said them. But I would learn eventually that observation can be a weapon as much as a gift. That night, after we got home from dinner, he poured me a glass of wine and said the words that would set everything in motion. He said Emma had always had it easy. He said it must be hard, watching your younger sister live the life you deserved. He said maybe things didn't have to be so unfair. I should have seen it for what it was. I should have recognized the manipulation, the way he was planting seeds in soil he knew was already fertile with resentment. But I didn't want to see it. I wanted someone to finally acknowledge what I had been feeling for years. I wanted permission to stop pretending, and David gave me that permission. He became my co-conspirator in a crime I didn't even know I was planning yet. It started small, a negative comment here, a subtle undermining there. When Emma asked me to be her maid of honor, I said yes, with tears in my eyes, hugging her tight and telling her it would be the greatest honor of my life. And part of me meant it. But another part, a growing part, immediately started calculating. I convinced myself I was just protecting her. James seemed too good to be true. Didn't she deserve to know if there was something wrong with him? Didn't I have a responsibility, as her older sister, to make sure she wasn't making a mistake? That's what I told myself as I started digging into James's past. That's what I told myself when I hired a private investigator, using money from our joint savings that David helpfully suggested I redirect. I was being a good sister. I was looking out for her. I was making sure she wasn't about to marry someone who would hurt her. The lies we tell ourselves are always the most convincing ones. The investigator found nothing. James Cooper was exactly who he appeared to be. A successful architect from a good family, with a clean record and a reputation for integrity that made even the investigator seem impressed. When he handed me his report, I remember feeling a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief because my sister was safe. Disappointment because I had nothing. And that disappointment, that dark, twisted disappointment, should have been my wake-up call. It should have shown me how far I had already fallen. But instead, I showed the report to David, expecting him to share my frustration. Instead, he smiled that charming smile of his and asked why we needed the truth when we could create something better. I should have walked away. I should have ended it right there, told David that we had gone too far, that Emma was my sister and I loved her and this had to stop. But I didn't, because by then, I was in too deep. By then, the poison had spread too far, and because, though I didn't know it yet, David had his own reasons for wanting to destroy Emma's happiness. Reasons that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with his own dark obsessions. David had always been friendly with Emma, too friendly, some might say, but I never let myself think about it. He complimented her work, supported her career, remembered her birthday when I often forgot. I told myself he was just being a good brother-in-law. I told myself it was sweet that they got along so well. I was blind in the way that only someone who desperately needs to believe something can be blind. David didn't want to destroy Emma's engagement because he was on my side. He wanted to destroy it because he wanted Emma for himself. He had wanted her for years, watching her from across holiday dinner tables, imagining a life that didn't include me. And I, in my jealous stupidity, handed him the perfect opportunity. The plan was David's idea, but I was the one who executed it. We created fake evidence, text messages, photographs, financial records, all of it pointing to an affair between James and a woman from his office. David knew people who could make digital fabrications look genuine. He knew how to plant evidence on James's computer, how to create a paper trail that would hold up to scrutiny. And I knew Emma. I knew exactly how to present the information, exactly which words would hurt the most, exactly when to reveal the truth for maximum devastation. Looking back, I am horrified by how calculated I was, how cold. I had become someone I didn't recognize, someone my 3-year-old self, the one who had first held her baby sister in tiny arms, would have been terrified of. I waited until 2 weeks before the wedding. The invitations had been sent. The venue was booked. The dress was hanging in Emma's closet, a beautiful cream silk gown that she had shown me with tears of joy in her eyes. I invited her over for lunch, just the two of us, telling her I had something important to discuss. She arrived with flowers because that was Emma, always thinking of others even when she was drowning in wedding stress. I served her tea and sandwiches and made small talk until I couldn't delay any longer. Then I put the folder on the table between us, my hands trembling with something I convinced myself was righteous anger, but was probably just fear. I told her I was so sorry. I told her this was the hardest thing I had ever had to do. I told her that James wasn't who she thought he was. And then I watched as my sister's entire world collapsed. Emma didn't cry at first. She went very still, almost frozen, as she looked through the photographs and messages I had fabricated. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. She asked if I was sure. She asked if there could be some mistake. She asked, with heartbreaking hope in her eyes, if maybe someone was trying to hurt James, trying to frame him, trying to destroy what they had built together. And I looked my baby sister in the eyes and told her I was certain. I told her I had verified everything. I told her I would never, ever bring her something like this unless I was absolutely sure. I watched her believe me, because why wouldn't she? I was her sister. I had always protected her. I had never lied to her, not about anything that mattered, until now, until I broke her heart with a lie so complete, so devastating, that it would take years to undo the damage. Emma left my house that day like a ghost. She didn't call me afterward, didn't text, didn't respond to my carefully crafted messages of support. I learned later that she had confronted James that same night. She had shown him the evidence, demanded an explanation, and when he couldn't provide one that made sense, she had given him back the ring. James tried to defend himself. He insisted the evidence was fake, that he had never cheated, that someone was setting him up. But the fabrications were too good, too detailed, too convincing. And Emma was too hurt, too shocked, too desperate to protect herself from further pain. She ended their engagement, canceled the wedding, and retreated into a grief so profound that my mother called me in tears, begging me to do something, to help somehow, to bring back the Emma we all knew and loved. I should have felt guilty. Part of me did, buried somewhere beneath the satisfaction and the relief and the twisted sense of triumph. But mostly, I felt vindicated. Finally, Emma wasn't the perfect one. Finally, she had made a mistake, chosen wrong, fallen from the pedestal our parents had placed her on. Finally, we were equals. For the first time in my life, I was the one people turned to. I was the one who had been right. I was the strong sister who had uncovered the truth and protected the family. Our mother praised my instincts. Our father thanked me for being brave enough to deliver such painful news. And I absorbed their gratitude like a plant starving for sunlight, never questioning whether I deserved it, never wondering what would happen when the truth eventually came out. For 6 months, I lived in that false reality. I comforted Emma through her depression. I helped her pack up the apartment she had shared with James. I held her while she cried and told her she deserved better, all while knowing that I was the one who had taken everything from her. David seemed pleased with how things had unfolded, though I noticed he was spending more time at Emma's place, helping with repairs, bringing her dinner, offering his shoulder to cry on. I told myself he was just being supportive. I told myself I should be grateful to have such a caring husband. The lies I told myself multiplied like cells, dividing and spreading until I could no longer remember what the truth had ever looked like. The first crack appeared at a family dinner in October. James was there, which surprised me. He had stayed close with my parents despite the broken engagement, and they had invited him for old times' sake. He looked terrible, thin and tired, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But there was something else in his expression too, something determined. He pulled me aside after dessert, his hand gripping my arm just tight enough to communicate that this wasn't a casual conversation. He told me he knew. He told me he had spent 6 months investigating, hiring his own experts, tracing the digital footprints of the fabricated evidence. He told me he had found everything, every manipulated image, every manufactured text, every lie I had carefully constructed. And then he asked me why. That single word, spoken so quietly that no one else could hear, destroyed whatever was left of my certainty. Why? Why would I do this to my own sister? Why would I take something beautiful and burn it to the ground? Why would I become a monster wearing the face of family? I had no answer. Or rather, I had 1,000 answers, but none of them seemed adequate when faced with the wreckage I had created. I begged him not to tell Emma. I actually got down on my knees in my parents' kitchen and begged this man I had destroyed to keep my secret. I offered him money. I offered him anything he wanted. I told him I would make it right somehow, that I would fix what I had broken. But even as I spoke, I knew I was lying. I didn't want to fix anything. I just didn't want to get caught. James looked at me with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt and told me that Emma deserved to know the truth. He said he had scheduled a meeting with her for the following day. He said he had all the evidence organized and documented. He said he would tell her everything with or without my confession. and she could decide what to do with the information. Then he walked away, and I watched him go, knowing that my carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room, staring at the walls, trying to figure out some way to stop what was coming. David was no help. When I told him what James knew, he went pale, gathered some things, and told me he needed to clear his head. He didn't come home that night, or the next, or the one after that. By the time Emma's text arrived, asking me to meet her at the coffee shop where we used to have our sister dates, David had stopped answering my calls entirely. I was alone, completely alone, about to face the consequences of choices I had made when I still had someone to hide behind. Emma was already seated when I arrived. She wasn't crying, that was the first thing I noticed. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes held something I had never seen before. Disappointment, not anger, not hatred, just profound, devastating disappointment. She gestured for me to sit, waited until I had ordered a tea I wouldn't drink, and then placed a folder on the table between us. The same kind of folder I had used to destroy her engagement. Inside was everything James had found. Proof of the fabrication, proof of my involvement, proof that her own sister had constructed an elaborate lie to take away the love of her life. She didn't yell, she didn't scream or cry or cause a scene. She simply asked me if it was true. And in that moment, faced with her quiet devastation, I couldn't lie anymore. The word came out before I could stop it. Small and broken and utterly inadequate. Yes, it was true. All of it. What followed was the worst conversation of my life. Emma didn't understand, and I couldn't make her understand because there was no rational explanation for what I had done. How do you explain to someone that you loved them and destroyed them at the same time? How do you articulate years of jealousy so deep it had become part of your identity? How do you confess that you had let your own darkness consume not just yourself, but everyone around you? I tried. I talked for what felt like hours, pouring out every excuse, every justification, every twisted piece of logic that had brought me to this point. And Emma listened, her expression never changing, her tea growing cold in front of her. When I finally stopped talking, exhausted and empty, she nodded once and said she understood. Not that she forgave me, not that we would be okay, just that she understood. Then she stood up, left enough money on the table to cover both our drinks, and walked out of my life. My mother called me that evening, her voice shaking with a mixture of grief and anger I had never heard before. She told me Emma had told her everything. She asked if it was true, and when I confirmed it, she went silent for so long I thought she had hung up. When she spoke again, she said she didn't recognize me anymore. She said she didn't know how she had raised a daughter capable of such cruelty. She said she needed time, maybe a lot of time, before she could look at me without seeing the stranger I had become. My father didn't call at all. His silence was somehow worse. And then there was David. I finally tracked him down 3 weeks after Emma learned the truth. He had been staying at a hotel downtown, apparently planning his next move. When I confronted him, demanding to know why he had abandoned me, why he had left me to face this alone, he laughed. Actually laughed. And then he told me the truth about everything. He had never cared about helping me with my jealousy. He had used my insecurities as a tool, manipulating me into destroying Emma's relationship because he wanted her for himself. While I had been congratulating myself on my cleverness, David had been positioning himself as Emma's savior, the supportive brother-in-law who was always there when she needed someone. He had planned to wait a respectable amount of time after the broken engagement, then make his move. He had expected to end up with Emma and eventually divorce me, leaving me with nothing while he got everything I had ever wanted. But Emma had never been interested. Even in her grief, even when she was vulnerable and confused, she had seen through David's charm to the darkness underneath. She had politely declined his advances, maintained distance when he pushed too hard, and eventually started to wonder why her brother-in-law was so invested in her recovery. When James revealed the truth about the fabricated evidence, she started connecting dots. David's technical knowledge, his proximity to the plan, his obvious interest in the outcome. By the time I tracked him down at that hotel, Emma had already reached out to a lawyer. Not to sue me, though she had every right, but to document David's behavior in case she needed protection later. My marriage ended, not with a fight, but with a whimper. David didn't even try to save it. Why would he? I had been a means to an end, nothing more. He moved out within the month, taking half of everything we had built together and leaving me with a mortgage I couldn't afford on my own. I sold the house at a loss just to escape the memories it held. I moved into the apartment where I sit now, a small one-bedroom in a neighborhood I never imagined living in, surrounded by the debris of a life I systematically destroyed. I lost my job 3 months later. Word had gotten out, as word always does, about what I had done to my sister. In a professional world built on trust and relationships, I had become a liability. My firm didn't fire me outright. That would have been too clean, too easy. Instead, they made my position untenable, stripping away my responsibilities one by one until I had no choice but to resign. I collected unemployment for a while, sent out resumes to jobs I was overqualified for, and tried to rebuild some semblance of a career. But my name was poison. In an age of social media and whisper networks, there was nowhere to hide from what I had done. The irony is that Emma and James got back together. It took time, of course. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight, even when the original break was based on lies. But James was patient, and Emma was brave, and their love was strong enough to survive even my attempts to destroy it. They got married last spring, a small ceremony with only close family and friends. I wasn't invited. My parents sent me a picture afterward, Emma radiant in a simple white dress, James looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. My mother wrote a note with it. She said she hoped I was working on becoming someone they could welcome back someday. She said she still loved me, would always love me, but loving someone and trusting them are different things. She said the door wasn't closed forever, but it was closed for now. I have spent the past year trying to understand how I became this person. I started therapy, finally, after decades of insisting I didn't need it. I have unpacked the jealousy, the insecurity, the desperate need for approval that drove me to such destructive choices. I have traced it back to its roots, examining every moment where I chose resentment over love, competition over connection, darkness over light. It doesn't excuse what I did. Nothing can excuse what I did, but understanding how I got here is the first step toward making sure I never go back. I tried to apologize to Emma once, about 6 months ago. I wrote her a letter, 20 pages long, pouring out everything I had learned about myself and my choices. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't deserve it, and we both knew it. I just wanted her to know that I understood, finally, the magnitude of what I had taken from her, that I was genuinely sorry, not because I got caught, but because I had hurt someone who had never been anything but loving toward me, that I was trying to become someone worthy of the family I had betrayed. She didn't respond. I didn't expect her to. But a month later, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a small painting, one of Emma's, a sunrise over water, all soft pinks and gentle golds, the kind of image that makes you feel like maybe tomorrow could be better than today. There was no note. There didn't need to be. I keep that painting on my wall now, opposite my bed, so it's the first thing I see every morning. It reminds me of what I had, what I lost, what I might someday, if I work hard enough and long enough, begin to earn back. My relationship with my parents is slowly, painfully thawing. I see them once a month now, awkward dinners where we talk about the weather and avoid the elephant in every room. My mother hugged me at our last visit, quickly and carefully, like she was testing whether it was safe. My father said he was proud of me for going to therapy. Small steps, baby steps, but steps nonetheless. I don't know if Emma will ever forgive me. I don't know if I will ever forgive myself. Some damage is permanent, some trust cannot be rebuilt, and I have no right to expect anything different. But I am learning, slowly, how to live with what I did. Not to accept it, never to accept it, but to carry it, to let it shape me into someone better instead of someone bitter, to use the weight of my guilt not as a chain, but as a compass, pointing me toward the person I should have been all along. If you are listening to this and you recognize something of yourself in my story, if you feel that jealousy curling in your chest, that resentment whispering that someone else's joy is your loss, Please stop. Please recognize it for the poison it is before it takes root too deep to remove. The satisfaction of tearing someone down is momentary. The emptiness that follows is forever. I learned this the hardest way possible. I destroyed my sister's happiness because I couldn't build my own, and in the end, I lost everything I ever loved. My husband, who was never really mine, my career, which I had sacrificed so much for.